Welcome to The Deep Dive. Today we're taking a really close look at something quite foundational, I think, for global policy on biological invasions.
We're diving into the global impacts data set of invasive alien species. Uh, GIDIAS for short.
Right, GIDIAS. And this isn't just another review paper, is it?
No, not at all. This is a huge piece of work led by Bacher and a very large international team. Think of it less like a review and more like a massive standardized database.
Okay.
It pulls together documented impacts, and this is key positive, negative, and neutral impacts of alien species. And it looks at them across both nature and human well-being.
So it's trying to capture the full picture.
Exactly. It's aiming to be the source if
Yeah.
you want to understand the sheer complexity of invasive species impacts globally.
And complex is definitely the word. The urgency around invasive alien species, IAS, it's huge. We know they're a major driver of global change.
Oh, absolutely. They hit biodiversity hard, and they impact people's livelihoods all over the world.
The numbers are pretty sobering when you look at them.
They are. Globally, we're looking at something like 40,000 species with known alien populations. And the projection, based on current trends, that could jump by 36% in the next 30 years. It's really escalating.
And that acceleration, it's driven by just unprecedented rates of introduction, right?
Yes, we're seeing around 200 new alien species documented every year.
Wow.
But here's a really critical point, the one that makes mitigation so difficult. Almost a quarter, 25% of species recorded as aliens somewhere new. They've never been recorded as alien anywhere else before.
So 1 in 4 is basically a completely new problem showing up.
Precisely. A completely new potential threat. Conservationists, managers, they're often working blind with these. There's no track record.
Which perfectly highlights why something like GIDIAS was needed, that lack of solid baseline data.
Exactly. It was actually put together specifically to feed into the Global Assessment Report by IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services.
Okay. So it's providing the hard evidence for those big global reports.
It is. It's the empirical data needed to underpin and hopefully shift global policy.
So let's unpack how they structured this, because you mentioned it covers more than just ecological harm. That seems like a big shift.
It is. They use the IPBES conceptual framework, which is quite broad. It forced them to look beyond just the ecology and categorize impacts across three distinct pillars.
Okay. What are those pillars?
So the first one is what you'd probably expect, impacts on nature. That's your classic ecology, measurable changes to the ecosystem itself. Impacts on native species, communities, how the ecosystem functions.
Standard stuff, but essential.
Essential, yes.
Yeah.
Then the second pillar moves towards us, nature's contributions to people, or NCP.
NCP. Right. So how ecosystems actually benefit people.
Exactly. How those benefits change. It covers material things, food, timber, water, but also regulating services like pollination or climate regulation, and non-material things too, like recreation, learning, cultural value.
Okay, that broadens it quite a bit already. And the third?
The third pillar is maybe the most innovative inclusion here, good quality of life, or GQL.
Good quality of life. How does that fit in with invasive species?
It looks directly at changes to human well-being, things like our health, our security, our ability to carry out activities we value.
So an invasive plant causing allergies, for example, or maybe something impacting tourism or fishing.
Precisely. It forces the conversation out of just the environmental box and connects it directly to public health, to economic activity, to human security. It's a really important link.
That feels like a major step, acknowledging these wider impacts so formally.
It is. And another key thing is that they didn't just hunt for negative impacts. The data set actively includes non-negative ones.
Like positive impacts.
Yes, positive impacts, but also neutral ones, where a study looked and specifically found no impact, and even what they call non-directional impacts. So a change happened, but it wasn't clearly good or bad.
Okay, that has a lot of nuance. But how do you standardize what counts as positive or negative across nature, NCP, and GQL? That seems potentially subjective.
It does, and they had to be very specific. So for nature, a negative impact means a native species is disadvantaged. Maybe its population drops. Positive means it benefits somehow.
Okay.
For NCP or GQL, negative means people are harmed or a service they rely on is reduced. Positive means people benefit, maybe they get more of something useful, or perhaps a disservice like a pest is reduced.
Right, so it depends on who or what you're evaluating.
Absolutely. And to keep all this organized across, over 22,000 records, they had to link it to existing standards.
Makes sense. Which standards did they use?
They used EICAT, That's the environmental impact classification for alien taxa, for the impacts on nature. And for the socioeconomic side, the NCP and GQL impacts, they use SACAT, the socioeconomic impact classification for alien taxa.
PICAT and SACAT. Got it. That linkage must be crucial for making comparisons.
It's what allows you to compare apples and oranges to some extent across different studies and contexts. It provides that common language.
Let's talk about how they actually built this data set. You said it was a huge collaboration.
Oh, massive. Herculean is probably fair. There were 114 assessors involved,
Wow.
working together, searching literature across 16 different languages.
16 languages. That's thorough.
It had to be, to get a truly global picture. And crucially, they were really strict about the type of evidence. Only impacts based on direct observation were included. Meaning studies where someone actually measured or observed the impact happening. They specifically excluded potential impacts, or anything based purely on models or extrapolations.
That's a really important distinction. It makes the data perhaps smaller in volume than it could have been, but much more robust, right? Based on observed reality.
Exactly. Quality and empirical grounding over sheer quantity or speculation. They really wanted to know what has happened, not just what might happen.
So how do they find all this observed data across the globe?
They used 4 main search strategies. First, they looked at existing regional checklists of alien species, like the GRIS database. Second, they did broad searches in databases using terms like impact or health, combined with different groups of species. Third, they used snowballing following references from papers they found. And this was vital for picking up gray literature.
Like government reports, theses, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And importantly, indigenous and local knowledge sources, too, were documented. And finally, they incorporated findings from existing expert reviews. It was a multi-pronged attack.
That sounds incredibly comprehensive. And the result was this huge data set.
Huge and rich. GIDIAS ended up with 22,865 records. And each record isn't just the impact. It has up to 52 fields of contextual information.
Like what sort of context?
Things like, was the study on an island? Was it in a protected area? What kind of habitat? Which specific native species were affected? What method did the study use? Even the language of the original source document?
That context sounds critical for understanding why an impact occurred, not just that it occurred.
Precisely. It allows for much deeper analysis later on.
So, turning to the big picture findings then, what does this mountain of data tell us overall?
Well, the scale itself is impressive, as we said. Over 22,800 impact records covering more than 3,300 invasive alien species, plants, animals, microbes, the lot.
And geographically, you mentioned the multilingual approach. Did it achieve good global coverage?
Surprisingly good, yes. Records came from 172 out of 195 countries. That's about 88% coverage.
That's very high. Any regional differences?
Yes, quite interesting ones. Coverage was highest in Africa, actually 96% of countries represented, and North America at 91%. It was lowest in Oceania, around 64%.
Africa having the highest coverage is fascinating. Why might that be?
It really suggests that the intensive effort, the 16 languages, digging into gray literature, collaborating with regional experts paid off. It likely captured data often missed by studies that rely heavily on, say, English language journals or data from traditional research hubs.
A real testament to that collaborative, inclusive approach.
I think so. In terms of where most records came from, Europe and Central Asia led the way with nearly 8,000, followed closely by the Americas. And mostly terrestrial impacts recorded, which isn't too surprising given monitoring challenges in aquatic systems.
Okay, and how did those records break down across those 3 pillars you mentioned earlier, nature, NCP, and GQL?
Right, so the environment impacts on nature still accounts for the largest chunk, about 13,200 records.
Okay.
But nature's contributions to people, NCP, had over 7,200 records. And good quality of life, GQL, had over 3,300.
So while nature impacts are most documented, nearly half the data set relates directly to human well-being in some way.
Exactly. That balance is a really significant outcome of this framework. It quantifies the human dimension much more strongly than previous efforts might have.
And linking back to those classification tools, AICAT and SciCat, how does the dataset use them to indicate the severity of impacts? That seems crucial for prioritizing action.
It is. For negative impacts, GIDIAS uses the standard severity levels from AICAT and SciCat, typically 4 levels.
Ranging from minimal to massive major.
Essentially, yes. For example, the highest level, level 3, signifies really severe outcomes. Under ICAT, for nature, that could mean local or even global extinctions caused by the alien species.
Wow.
And under SciCat for GQL, level 3 might mean that an entire human activity, like a specific type of farming or fishing, is locally abandoned because of the invader's impact.
That gives managers real clarity on where the most catastrophic impacts are happening. But you mentioned a limitation earlier, something about positive impacts.
Yes, that's a key caveat. While negative impacts get assigned these severity levels, positive impacts in the dataset are just recorded as positive. They aren't assigned a magnitude.
So you know that a species had a positive effect, but not how positive, whether it was a tiny benefit or a game-changing one.
Exactly. The dataset tells you the direction, positive, but not the strength or scale of that positive impact on nature or people.
That does seem like a significant gap if you were trying to, say, weigh up different impacts or even manage potentially beneficial alien species.
It is an operational limitation currently. It makes evidence-based decisions around positive impacts much harder compared to negative ones, where the severity scale helps prioritize.
Despite that, the overall policy relevance of having this consolidated, context-rich data must be huge.
Enormous. It provides that solid foundation for exploring these complex, context-dependent impacts across all three dimensions together, rather than in silos.
And you mentioned earlier it helps avoid a particular trap, the net impact calculation.
Yes, and this is crucial. The dataset structure and the authors strongly caution against trying to just add up all the positives and negatives to get a single net impact score for a species or an invasion.
Why is that so dangerous? It sounds mathematically simple.
It's simple but misleading. Think about it. You might have an invasive plant that creates huge economic benefits for a small group, maybe timber industry profits. That's a positive NCP-GQL impact. But maybe that same plant displaces lots of native species, negative nature impact. And its pollen causes widespread respiratory problems, increasing healthcare costs for the whole community, negative GQL impact.
Right, so the benefits go to one place, the costs to another.
Exactly. If you just calculate a net economic value, you might say, oh, the timber profits outweigh the health costs, so it's net positive. But that completely masks who wins and who loses. It hides the environmental damage and the public health burden.
So reporting impacts separately across nature, NCP, and GQL forces a more honest conversation about those trade-offs.
Precisely. It makes you look at the whole nuanced picture, not just a potentially misleading bottom line.
Are there other important caveats or limitations people should bear in mind when using GIDIAS?
Well, one is acknowledging that judging impact direction, positive or negative, isn't always clear-cut. It can depend on your perspective, your values.
So.
What one group sees as a negative impact on, say, a traditional fishery might be viewed differently by another group that benefits from the new species. So the definitions used for evaluation need to be really clear about whose values or which entities are being considered. It's inherently value-laden to some degree.
That makes sense. Anything else?
The interpretation of those neutral impact records. There are 615 records where studies apparently found no impact. That's interesting, but the authors are careful to point out the search wasn't specifically designed to be exhaustive for finding neutral impacts. So while those records are useful, they don't represent a definitive list of harmless alien species. It's more an indication of where impacts weren't detected in those specific studies.
So it highlights knowledge gaps as much as anything.
Yes, it points towards species or situations where maybe impacts are subtle or maybe they genuinely don't cause significant changes, but we need more targeted research to be sure. We tend to study the obvious bad guys or occasionally the good guys. The vast middle ground is often overlooked.
Okay, so ultimately, GIDIAS seems like a really vital step forward. It moves the conversation beyond just labeling invaders as bad and forces us to grapple with the complexity.
Absolutely. It shows alien species drive complex changes, often with winners and losers, and the outcomes are highly dependent on the specific context.
It gives us the data to connect the dots, doesn't it, between what happens to nature, how that affects nature's contributions to us, and how that ultimately impacts our quality of life.
Exactly. Those connections haven't always been studied together. GIDIAS provides the framework and the data to start doing that systematically.
So for you, the listener, thinking about where this field goes next, what's the most important research direction this data set opens up?
For me, it's absolutely exploring those connections and trade-offs between the pillars, moving beyond just cataloging impacts within nature, or within NCP, or within GQL.
And looking at the link.
Yes. How does an impact on nature cascade through to affect NCP and then GQL? Are there unexpected feedbacks? What happens when an action to mitigate a negative GQL impact accidentally creates a new problem for nature? Understanding those complex cross-category interactions and trade-offs That's the really critical frontier GIDIAS enables us to explore. It's where the surprises and the most important management insights are likely hiding.
Uncovering those hidden connections and consequences, a really challenging but essential task for understanding global change. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the global impacts dataset of invasive alien species with us today.